first time I interacted directly with Abizar Soltani was down at Goulburn. There's a lot of layers to him, I think, but his crimes are awful, horrific.
A man's body has been found in bushland off the Pacific Highway.
The 30-year-old father was shot in the head near his Kingswood home. The main line of inquiry for New South Wales Police will be links to outlaw motorcycle gangs.
Whilst he was part of the bikie gang, he didn't get into the drinking and the drugs.
A man has been shot dead in front of his fiancée in an execution-style ambush.
It sounded to me like 5 gunshots.
Underworld kingpin Pasquale Barbaro's body sprawled on a footpath.
He's a serial killer hitman. He didn't leave it to the others, he did it himself.
My name's Detective Senior Constable Anthony Mole. In 2016, I was attached to the New South Wales Homicide Squad. Early in the morning on the 30th of March 2016, we were just finishing our on-call period when we were notified that there was a murder out at Kingswood. Michael Davey was shot and murdered in Stafford Street. He did have a criminal background.
The 30-year-old father was shot in the head around midnight on the street near his Kingswood home. He told his girlfriend he was going outside to meet a mate. Neighbours heard up to 6 gunshots and raced to help.
I heard a car up the road screeching past, so yeah, I'm pretty sure that would have been a getaway car.
Mick Davey was a rebel, the Penrith City chapter. He grew up out in Western Sydney. He had a couple of different nicknames. The Prince of Penrith, Mickey D. He was a local identity. He was a member of the Rebels. He also was, a son. He was a brother, and he was a father.
He was a really genuine guy, an amazing father. He would drop anything for his son, anything, no matter what.
We went to the family home of Michael's father, Will Davey. I did tell Will Davey that no matter who his son was, we would investigate this just as we would of anyone else. And I told him that we don't get to choose who our victims are. They're all investigated the same way.
And reporter Gabrielle Boyle joins me from St Mary's Police Station. Gabby, do police have any suspects tonight?
Peter, the main line of inquiry for New South Wales Police will be Michael Davey's links to outlaw motorcycle gangs. They've set up Strike Force Glenorchy.
Detective Senior Constable Luke McEnany, who was the officer in charge of Mark Easter's murder, came to us and said, I believe the crew that I'm looking at in relation to Mark's murder are involved in your murder.
Who was this crew?
It's the Soltani crew. Up until then, I never heard of Abizar Soltani. He was an ex-rebel, Burwood chapter they had originally formed, but that was now defunct. The Soltani crew were into drug dealing, weapons trafficking, fraud, money laundering.
Stephen Hunt is my name. Back in 2016, I was at the Homicide Squad. Initially, I was called out to investigate the murder of Michael Davey. With the help of Luke McEnany, we were able to connect the Davey murder to the Easter murder. starting with the fact both of those victims were patch members of the Rebels outlaw motorcycle gang. Mark and Mick knew each other. They'd crossed paths, and they were part of that greater Rebels OMCG group. Mark Easter lived at Little Bay in southeastern Sydney. He was last seen alive 3 days before his body was found. He'd been out to dinner with his wife, and then he'd been seen by a neighbour speaking to some people in his street. They were in a white van. The white van became a key part of the police investigation. We discovered it travelled north out of Sydney on the Pacific Highway before it was driven down a quiet bush track off the highway. Thank you. So yeah, this is a photo of the van that was captured by a council camera that was looking into illegal dumping. And it was captured looking at the bush track. The white van returned back up the track past the same camera exactly 7 minutes later. Council workers thought the van may have been used for illegal dumping, so they drove down the bush track to check it out. But instead of an illegal dump, they found the body of Mark Easter.
A man's body has been found in bushland off the Pacific Highway at Cowan, northeast of Sydney. He hasn't yet been formally identified. Police are treating his death, though, as suspicious.
Mark Easter had been shot 4 times in the head at close range. Finding the van was the best clue to finding his killers. That van was up at the Central Coast. It was pulled over by the police. The van, on the face of it, presents as just a tradie van. But importantly, there was a locked cabinet in that van. And within that was firearms, a ballistic mask. We'd found bleach. There was drop sheets, gloves, things that linked it to the murder of Mark Easter. So it was highly important to what we're investigating. Soltani became a person of interest in the Mark Easter murder and then the Mick Davey murder, because it turns out his company Civic Traffic owned another van. A vehicle that may have been used to travel out towards the area that Michael Davey was murdered. So, you know, they could be involved. So we've got 2 Rebels bikies murdered and 2 vans owned by Afzal Soltani, an ex-Rebel bikie, linked to these murders. Luke McInerney's team were one step in front of us. They'd been surveilling Soltani and his crew at their Sydney HQ. They'd moved from Ryde to Sydney Olympic Park, in one of the high-rises there, security building. Soltani and Munchazada were living there. Sia Munchazada was an interesting character. We came to understand he was Soltani's right-hand man. They'd both broken off from the Burwood chapter of the Rebels, and now they were flatting together in the high-rise on Australia Avenue. Luke's surveillance team had observed a couple of other guys coming and going from the high-rise. Joshua Baines and Merwa Stanishar. Danishar was Munchazada's cousin. They were all ex-rebels, and now they form the nucleus of the Soltani crew. The surveillance gear placed inside the high-rise unit picked up all sorts of crew chatter, most of it innocuous. But one short conversation recorded 2 days before the Mick Davey murder would become very important to our investigation. Investigating the murders of Mick Davey and Mark Easter, it became evident our prime suspects were Abazar Soltani and his crew. This Soltani crew were working together, working as a team, and this group were very disciplined. We had the surveillance tape of the crew talking about Mick Davey before his murder. As helpful as that was, we needed more evidence, and we needed to establish motive. If the Soltani crew did kill Davey, were they acting alone, or were they taking payment from a third party? Some of the intelligence was around dispute that Mick Davey had had with a underworld criminal called Erkin Keskin. Erkin Keskin was very well known in the underworld. He's quite feared. He's rumoured to have quite a lot of money, had a crane business, had an apartment in the Toaster down at Circular Quay, and seemed to be emerging as quite a high-level member of the organised crime groups in Sydney. We were hearing that Keskin was paying people to do murders for him.
Keskin is probably one of the most dangerous guys around. He would pay $750,000 to get someone killed because he didn't like him. I'm Mark Murray. I'm crime editor of the Sydney Daily Telegraph. Keskin was worth enormous amounts of money. He built his fortune as he rose through the ranks of the Lone Wolf motorcycle gang. Keskin became a major drug player. He was huge in that world. That's how he could afford to spend $9,000 a week renting an apartment in the Toaster. Keskin partied pretty hard too, and one night he found himself exposed when he ran amok in Sydney's western suburbs.
Staggering down a driveway and leaving nothing to the imagination. Police wondering why he wasn't wearing any pants and where his weapon was. A Glock pistol fired 3 times. 38-year-old Erkin Keskin, a member of the Lone Wolf bikie gang, sparked this siege-like situation.
We believe he may have been affected by something, but at this stage we're not sure.
It's fair to say that Keskin didn't enjoy the spotlight, especially when it was shining bright on him. And let's face it, not looking his best. For that little escapade, he was tagged the naked bikie, and he hated it. Looking at Keskin the wrong way, could be fatal. And was going to get me knocked at one stage, Keskin, but yeah.
There was incidents there of fights in jail and firebombings of Keskin's interests out at Penrith. So that started to form the pattern of the intelligence and the information that we were getting from all various sources. In order to launch a prosecution, we needed hard evidence that Keskin had paid Soltani to kill Mick Davey.
Did you ever form a clear link between Keskin and the Soltani group?
Yeah, they met at a restaurant in Sydney. We had surveillance of them together at that time.
The story goes that Keskin would pay for a hit, pay Ab Soltani, fly over to Dubai or wherever he wanted to be and have a very perfect alibi.
The contract to kill theory became a plausible line of inquiry. Police spent a lot of time listening to the surveillance devices we'd planted in the high-rise apartment used by the Soltani crew. They were very conscious of the police methodology, so we had some devices in there, but they were very savvy with the way they'd operate in that apartment. They wouldn't speak about any of these matters. They'd communicate by BlackBerry, sitting at a table within the apartment, not actually communicate across the table. So they were very cautious. The best way to close the net around the Soltani crew was to watch and wait, and then strike when ready. So on September the 1st, 2016, we made an operational decision to go and have a look at what we call a safe house.
We identified a safe house at Ada Street in Concord. It was a unit Strikeforce Raptor made a covert entry. And during that search, they identified that there were a large number of different type of weaponry, semi-auto rifles and pistols, ammunition. There was methamphetamine, heroin. There was ballistic vests, police shirts, license plates. They're basically ghost plates for different vehicles.
Because of the complexity of what they were doing, they were utilising numerous vehicles, potentially up to 30 vehicles. They would have plates made for it that mirrored that car but were of a vehicle that wouldn't attract attention, and then they would go and park that car in a suburban street so it was inconspicuous, and when they wanted to use it they'd go along and they'd jump start the car. That car could be sitting there for months. Of course, what we didn't realise at the time was that another hit was in the works.
This is 9 News with Georgie Gardner.
Good evening. A man has been shot dead in front of his fiancée in an execution-style ambush on a street at St Mary's.
A white sheet covers the body of 29-year-old Mehmet Yilmaz after he was gunned down, shot at point-blank range by men in balaclavas. Investigators say they have no doubt this was a targeted attack.
They certainly wanted to make sure that this individual was deceased.
September 9, 2016, Mehmet Yilmaz went to an address in St Mary's, and when he came out he was ambushed.
This brutal murder all happened right in front of a large number of CCTV cameras. Police say they are now reviewing the footage as they try to hunt down those responsible.
So the video I'm watching here, this is CCTV of the murder of Mehmet Yilmaz. He walks outside. He goes to get in the car and the back of the car's illuminated by some headlights. It pulls up beside him, man leans out of the window and fires some shots at him, which hit Yilmaz. When an injured Yilmaz falls behind his car, the shooter jumps from the other car and fires twice to finish him off. Mehmet's de facto gets out. There's a passerby that comes and helps. That was a pretty callous murder, that one. Until then, we didn't know who Mehmet Yilmaz was. Investigations revealed he was a small-time dealer who'd been purchasing drugs from Keskin. Mehmet owed about $20,000 to Keskin and had been ordered to pay it, and he decided that he didn't want to pay it.
Mehmet had been kidnapped sometime earlier and taken to a warehouse in Western Sydney where he had been tortured. A finger was partially amputated.
One thing we discovered about Erkin Keskin was he liked to be paid, sometimes at any cost. With Mehmet Yilmaz, he either refused to pay his debt or was unable to procure the funds. And that was ultimately what we believe was his reason for being killed. We identified that it was very likely that our Sultani crew was involved. Following the murder of Mehmet Yilmaz, police rewound the surveillance audio that had been recorded in Sultani's unit in the hours before the shooting. Police were not listening to the audio in real time. We only heard the tapes after the murder.
Bang, 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 bang. On drive
we were hearing was pretty damning evidence, but not enough to charge a Soltani crew. To directly link these guys to the Yilmaz shooting, we had to examine the car used by the assassins on the night. That car was a Commodore. So we found the Commodore at an associate of this group in the underground car park over at Rhodes. We seized the Commodore, swabbed it for DNA and sent the samples off to the lab. At the same time as we're investigating Afzal Soltani, we're looking into his background. There's a lot of layers to him, I think. He's an interesting person. His parents emigrated from Afghanistan and he grew up in a loving household in Western Sydney. His family was actually, I think, quite well to do over there. But in 1979, when the Soviet Union invaded Afghanistan, hundreds of thousands of Afghanis were killed and the Soltani family fled Afghanistan. They fled over here and he had a bit of a struggled upbringing. Soltani attended Parramatta High School. His parents impressed upon him the need for a good education. He didn't smoke, didn't drink, and was above average in English and maths. However, he fell in with the wrong crowd. He got into a bit of criminality early. People were blowing up ATMs to get the cash tins out of them. Soltani was part of one of the groups that were doing that. Did a little bit of time in jail. While Soltani was in jail at Silverwater, he met Sia Munchazada, who would ultimately go on to become his right-hand man. Munchazada's family had fled the Taliban for a life in Australia, and the two young inmates bonded over their shared Afghani heritage.
I've met Abs plenty of times. I thought he was devoid of two very important qualities that you and I have, and that's compassion and kindness, because he was controlled by George and Joe. George Alex has the magic dust, which he just gets out of his pocket and he blows it in your eyes and then sells you a dream.
George Alex is at the centre of a web of unsavoury characters, including outlaw bikers, violent standover men and convicted terrorists.
Just this week, his name was dragged into the Royal Commission into Union Corruption, with claims his labour hire companies paid weekly kickbacks to the CFMEU.
Joe Antoon was a very violent person. He once told me about how he was doing a collection on somebody and he took a hacksaw blade and cut the guy's little finger off. And I said, okay, is that supposed to scare me? He's a standover man and he's a nasty fellow. Joe and George were an interesting couple. It was like Laurel and Hardy. One was devilishly smart and cunning, and the other one had brawn.
Burns worked with George Alex and his partner Joe Anton between 2011 and 2012 in a labour hire company, but had a falling out over money Burns said the pair owed the business.
They didn't pay the money, and it was just as simple as that. I'd had a heated discussion with Joe Antoon, and about 4 hours later there was a drive-by shooting on my house.
During the night, gunfire rang out in the most unlikely of neighbourhoods. Cranbrook Road, Bellevue Hill, opposite exclusive Scots College. Up to 5 shots hitting the front of the Burns family's palatial home.
Well, I was in bed, and I hear bang, bang, bang. I get up. I actually saw the car drive off.
You look a bit shaken today, Mr. Lee.
Well, you know, shooting at you will do that, you know.
One bullet passing through a bedroom where one of his 3 children was sleeping.
Missed her head by about 30 centimetres.
Family's okay? My family's fine, and the police are doing a thorough investigation.
7:30 has learned a key suspect in the shooting is a rebels biker chief called Abuzar Soltani. Also known as Abs, he's a convicted criminal and a close associate of George Alex.
Maybe it's a switch that just gets flicked and somebody goes from being a mild-mannered accountant to a mild-mannered murderer.
Police are investigating possible gang links to a man who was shot dead on the doorstep of his Strathfield home last night in front of his twin daughters.
Just 5 years old, these little girls watched as their father was shot dead. Joe Antoon was hit by at least 4 bullets at close range when he answered a knock at the door of his Strathfield home.
Joe Antoon was a Standover man, although I don't believe he deserved to be shot and murdered in front of his children. I mean, those kids are traumatised for life.
So the murder of Joe Antoon, I think, is a turning point for Ab Soltani. This was a person who he respected enormously, almost loved like a father. And I know the killing rocked him. And I think made him even a little bit more ruthless than he already was. He'd already showed signs of ruthlessness.
It was Joe Antoon who had introduced Soltani to bikie culture. By the time Antoon was murdered, Soltani had become president of the Burwood chapter of the Rebels. Whilst I think he was part of the bikie gang, I don't know if it suited him to a great extent. He was the square peg in the round hole with a lot of the OMCGs, Didn't get into the drinking and the drugs.
Some of the rebels were racists. And there's a story that he went into the Burwood clubhouse at one stage and was threatened to kill the whole lot of them because they had disrespected one of the crew that he kind of adopted.
And so Soltani went out on his own and formed a crew with some of these young guys. Soltani was the leader, with the inner circle being Sia Munshazada, his cousin Moa Stanishar, and Joshua Baines. There was a bit of muscle there. There was a bit of technical expertise there doing legitimate activities, but a lot of criminal activity as well.
He had a very tight crew around him of disaffected young guys who had become a black ops killing squad. They really did consider themselves a cut above everybody else.
They were smart, but not that smart. And by November 2016, police were closing the intelligence gaps on a very dangerous group. We'd worked out that the Soltani crew were probably responsible for about at least 3 murders that we were looking at. Mark Easter, Davey, and now Yilmaz. With the Mehmet Yilmaz murder, DNA evidence obtained from the Commodore had confirmed a link to the Soltani crew. So the shooter in that video used his left hand, which becomes very important. Our surveillance identified that Soltani is left-handed. Also the clothes he's wearing. Our investigators hone in on the fact that the particular shoes are worn, and we go back to footage of Soltani leaving the address at Sydney Olympic Park, and he's wearing the same shoes and clothing. So those little pieces of the puzzle become really important. The bottom line, we're very close to a resolution stage when there's another murder.
Underworld kingpin Pasquale Barbaro's body sprawled on a footpath gunned down execution style. Barbaro was ambushed in his car after paying a visit to the Earlwood home of another underworld figure, George Alex.
When Barbaro was shot outside George Alex's house, and there's this image of this mafioso lying in the street dead, it hit the headlines in such a big way. People are going, what the hell's going on here?
Pasquale Barbaro's cold-blooded execution on a Sydney street has our top cops worried.
My number one concern always will be that a poor innocent person becomes a victim in the exchange of gunfire.
Nine reporter Gabrielle Boyle is at the scene in Earlwood where Pasquale Barbaro was gunned down.
This is, Pete, a very complex investigation. Not only do they have to speak with a lot of associates, but they've got to speak with a number of neighbours who saw things in the street in the hours before and afterwards.
Pascal was a pretty prominent member of the Sydney underworld.
They're falling to the left, falling to the right of me.
Wasn't really affiliated to any particular bikie gang. We quickly learned, however, that he was well known to the target of our investigation, Abazar Soltani. There was a lot of conflict between Soltani and Pascal Barbaro. There was intelligence that both of them had had a go at each other at various stages. One of the first things we did was to look at the surveillance cameras in the apartment at Sydney Olympic Park. What we saw? They take the lift down to the car park and exit the building by car. Soltani and the group, including Baines and Simon Shazada, Danishar, they head out in a vehicle in a WRX and they head over towards Belmore. They go and pick up a car that they had stashed there, and then they drive that car over to Earlwood and they commit the murder. And how did we know for sure? Well, the first thing is we established the timelines, starting with Pasquale Barbaro. What we learnt was that about 4 p.m. on that day he goes to Larkhill Avenue. He's certainly in the house of George Alex's mum. George Alex was evasive as to why Barbaro had been invited to his mother's place. We eliminated him as a suspect in the murder inquiry. However, we were able to establish the exact movements of the Soltani crew when they swapped out the WRX for an Audi Q7 at Belmore. What we learnt was that Joshua Baines was in the back of the Audi driven by Simon Shazada, and Soltani was in the front seat. We established the Audi came to a stop a few doors down the road from George Alex's mother's house, where the crew lay in wait for Pasquale Barbaro to leave the house. He did so at 9 p.m, walking to his Mercedes parked on the street. CCTV from across the road picks up the Mercedes headlights coming on, closely followed by the arrival of the Audi Q7. The first shots are fired by Baines from the rear of the car, and they strike Barbaro, who gets out of his car. And Soltani gets out and runs around the front, chases Barbaro down the road. Pascal collapses and he's shot further by Soltani.
It sounded to me like 5 gunshots.
The gunman fled in a stolen Audi Q7, which was later abandoned and torched in Concord.
Well, there was an explosion and the car was fully alit.
Investigating the Barbaro murder, we soon realised there was a more personal element to it.
There was a personal relationship between Barbaro and Soltani. Soltani had a hatred for him. He believed that Barbaro was involved in the Joe Antoun murder. Joe Antoon was a mentor and a friend to Abuzar Sultani, and Sultani looked up to him very much and was very upset by his murder when that occurred.
50-year-old standover man Joseph Antoon was gunned down at the door of his Strathfield home in December 2013. The court heard evidence that the hit on Joe Antoon was ordered by Pasquale Barbaro and Les Elias.
On the afternoon that Pasquale Barbaro was killed, the tracking device is found by Sultani's crew in a car about 2 o'clock in the afternoon. They still went ahead and killed him at 9 o'clock that night, even knowing that the cops are onto him. I actually think he probably knew the net was closing in and just thought, I'm going to get this guy before I go in. I really believe that, you know. Two days later, they track Ab Sultani to a cemetery where he's putting down red roses on the grave of Joe Antoon, as if to say, I got him for you, boss.
This is 9 News with Deborah Knight.
Good evening. A massive police operation has swept through Sydney Olympic Park as heavily armed officers hunted those responsible for a series of underworld murders.
Olympic Park in lockdown. The tactical response unit in control. Weapons drawn as detectives arrest 2 men.
There's another bloke. There was the SWAT team and they had all the guns and all the police were running around.
Every arrest today in full view of the public.
Initially I thought it's like a movie shooting or something.
So yeah, this is a photo of the Tactical Operations Police having arrested Sultani in the street. That was the point in time he hasn't seen the public again.
And then there was this photo came through, Ab Sultani, and his eyes just looking up, as if to say, he got me.
I remember watching Abs. He's sitting down on the footpath, looking a little bit bloody. He didn't go easily.
A total of 5 men are thought to have been arrested. They are now being questioned over the execution of Barbaro and several others.
And of great importance to us is capturing items of evidence that we think are going to have information about these murders, i.e. the Blackberries.
They seized 11 vehicles, more than 40 mobile phones, and 9 men with alleged links to the Rebels Outlaw motorcycle gang were charged with a long list of offences.
Where were you on that day?
I was actually at another search warrant at the address of Joshua Baines over at Wentworth Point.
Of those arrested, 27-year-old Abuzar Sultani, 28-year-old Sia Munazada, 24-year-old Joshua Baines and 23-year-old Merwe Danishar faced court today.
And then I hear he's linked to 3 murders. And we came out the next day with Murder Inc.
With the surveillance you had, could you have stopped the Barbaro murder?
Yeah, the question of could we have prevented Barbaro's murder has been asked, and we ask ourselves, as investigators. The answer from our point of view is no. We didn't have the evidence to jump on them at the time. That evidence just wasn't available, and it wasn't available really in a lot of them until we got into the Blackberries. We'd seized the Blackberry devices used by the Sultani crew when we arrested them. But in order to build a brief of evidence for the murder trials, we had to crack all the encrypted messages they'd been sending each other. And out of those Blackberries, was a whole treasure trove of information. Some amazingly candid conversations about what they had done came out. Straight after the Barbaro murder, they are gloating, if you will, about it. There was a lot of, nearly high fives, I suppose you'd say, from the group. The first time I interacted directly with Abazar Sultani was down at Goulburn when I got him out to be interviewed. He's an interesting human. He's clearly intelligent. He was studying a Bachelor of Business at Macquarie University. His crimes are awful, horrific, but at the end of the day, he pleaded guilty to 5 murders.
In June of 2019, we started to review Strikeforce Bandala, which is the murder of Nicholas Stribbin. He was a 19-year-old kid that had been viciously assaulted in Redfern in May of 2013. Stribbin deals drugs with his dad in and around the Redfern area. There's another drug dealer that's dealing for Sultani, but he was also dealing with the Stribbins. He had a $400 drug debt, and he was assaulted by the Stribbins, and he made a phone call to Abazar Sultani saying that he was being stood over and assaulted, and Abazar Sultani obviously needing to exert his dominance in that area, got the crew together and they went into Redfern to deal with that situation.
Nicholas Stribbin was assaulted by this group of men, during which he was hit with a baseball bat, and he died as a result of that.
Abazar Sultani and Siar Munshizada won't just serve 1 life term, sentenced to 3 for each of the lives they took away. 2 men in their 30s who will never see the outside of prison again. Munshizada defiant until the end, waving a post-it note with the words "biased dog" before he was led away. Joshua Baines will be 56 when he's eligible for release. Mirwaz Danisha jailed for a minimum 11 years. A once invincible hit squad, outnumbered and outsmarted by police.
They can sit in their jail cell and contemplate their murderous action.
There is no riddles that playing on me. Plays fiddle, she do as she please. They're falling to the left, falling to the right.
The Sultani crew actually set the template for the modern day hits that we're seeing now. Sultani was very clever. He would have cars stashed all over Sydney, multiple cars. When you see someone shot, then a car set on fire 5 kilometres away, that is the Sultani template. Interestingly enough though, Ab Sultani did the shooting.
It takes one to know.
He was always the one pulling the trigger.
It takes just one, they're falling at the side of me.
He didn't leave it to the others, he did it himself.
Now, the suburban executions and hitmen terrorising quiet neighbourhoods. It's Australia's new gangland war.
There's 100 more of those young guys out there today who are all taking instructions and doing things. And the contract killings today are sort of $1 million and more. It's a lot of money for some of those kids. I actually feel sorry for Abs. That boy will never see the light of day. He'll never be able to walk on grass again. He'll never be able to hold a child, his child, because he won't be having any. His life is over. Joe Antoun sold him a dream. George Alex, he's a liar, he's a cheat, he's a thief, and he's about ready to spend the next 7 to 10 years in the right place.
Police have smashed an alleged crime syndicate, arresting construction identity George Alex as part of the multi-million-dollar tax evasion and money laundering scheme.
George Alex was sentenced today to 9 years and 3 months, the maximum jail term for conspiring to defraud the ATO of more than $10 million. He will be eligible for parole in October 2030.
And there'll be a lot of people in there that won't like George. It's not going to be a very comfortable life for George.
38-year-old Erkin Keskin, a member of the Lone Wolf bikie gang, sparked this siege-like situation.
And what eventually happened to Erkin Keskin?
Apparently he's dead. He died in Turkey. So yeah, he's not with us anymore.
In relation to whether or not we've heard the last of Abulazar Sultani, I'd probably have to say no.
He's a serial killer hitman. He's already admitted to 5 murders.
From what I understand, he's under investigation for quite a few more. It will go into double figures.
So the Abulazar Sultani story isn't finished yet?
You never know. You never know.
There is no middle, riddles that playing on me. The cat plays fiddle, she do as she please. They're falling to the left, falling to the right.